Peace. I'm your host, DJ Valerie B. Love, and I have somebody here who shares some similar heritage as mine, but I think you are a little bit more close to the heritage, and you are rocking, advising, and helping save the world with Bitcoin mining and recycling tires and all these wonderful things. Your big brain is welcome here on this stage. Thanks, Mags Granowska. Welcome.
I heard you say heritage. I was like, oh yes, we do have similar hair.
I know. I know we were both having some technical difficulties, and I'm like,
Oh my
we are
gosh.
doing this, man. We both curled our hair today. Forget about it. How's it going, sister? What's shaking in your beautiful world?
I am like, you getting those vibes of spring coming back, and it's like, oh, summer's around the corner. I can't wait. Everything's getting warm. I love it.
I
So what
know
do
it's
you do?
definitely we need it. I think I know it's kind of cold and cloudy here where I'm at, but yeah, I think we need to have a little more color. That's why I wear so many colors because it keeps my mood
Yes,
alive.
yes.
I'm a big fan of the colors. So, Mags, let's talk about how can people recycle tire waste into Bitcoin? And before we totally get in that one exact layer, why don't you tell everybody who you are, what's all your magic sauce, and what's your big, big, giant super mission in Bitcoin?
Okay, well, there's a lot of things there. So I've been around the block. Haha. I know, silly, but I got into this just like I think it's not a typical story from the perspective of like number go up, and it's like why is number going up? I need to be in number going up, right? But then the people that become Bitcoiners because then they start to research, they dive in, they read the white paper, they read this, they're like, what's going on with money, right? They start thinking about that and thinking about all the other things that is quite complicated about Bitcoin that makes it a lot harder to understand. But I came from a background where I spent a decade working on low carbon economic transition and energy systems, right?
Okay.
And policy in Canada. And so I had that background, and it was kind of like there were some intersecting points. I'm like, okay, I understand energy, and that's a huge component of Bitcoin mining. So then that connected for me. But then I think too, and I really like to break it down into stories and how do we bring more people into Bitcoin is like, what is your particular story? Like, what's your connection point, right? And so for me, there were like several reinforcing things within my family that also like, looking back and talking with my grandparents, talking with my parents, that kind of clicked it more for me. And there's, I think, like 3 specific parts that for me and my family history really reinforced why Bitcoin, and that comes from like government confiscation, right?
Mm-hmm.
From abandoning your country because it's not in a good spot to sort of have better life for your kids and yourself, and just family wealth being stolen, right? And so those are kind of my 3 touch points, and we can get into that later.
Okay.
But that's like, that's my story, and maybe it'll help others find their story into Bitcoin. So in terms of like my first kind of foray of working in the Bitcoin space, I helped launch the first Bitcoin fund in Canada. And so we
Wow.
put it on the Toronto Stock Exchange. We did an IPO. And we also took, similar to Grayscale, through IQ, took the Ontario Securities Commission, which kind of throws its weight around. It's like the SEC of Canada in terms of like what they say all the other provinces kind of tend to follow. And
Okay.
so we took them to court. The court had a 26-page document that said, yeah, it is in the public interest for Canadians to invest in Bitcoin. And that paved the way and kind of created the roadmap for all the ETFs afterwards. So that was kind of cool being, part of a team that really just, we did breakthroughs here in Canada on that front.
Wow.
So that was, part of that. And then there's also there's the highs like that. And then there's the lows of being part of Quadriga, where I lost money in Quadriga, but I became a bankruptcy inspector for that. And that kind of reinforces the whole, like, don't keep all your Bitcoin on an exchange. Like, custody is super important. So yeah.
Can you let everybody know who may not know what the Quadriga fiasco was about?
So it was FTX before FTX. Like
Mm.
it was FTX was Quadriga on steroids. So ours was about 200 million in terms of the amount of money that was lost. But that was about 2018, 2019, early 2019 when the exchange went down. And that was the same kind of story where he gambled users' money, right? He traded against users. He took the money and sent it to other exchanges. and tried to make bets, but it was like, Bitcoin's going down and he's selling it, he's buying Ethereum, it's going up, it's, trading against where the trend is going. So we lost a lot of user money that way. He also embezzled money, right? Like he bought homes, he bought a plane, a boat, cars, like lavish vacations, like all that jazz, all the things you're not supposed to do. And it really set how the securities commissions in Canada, look at cryptocurrencies and sort of pave the regulatory path. And sometimes it came, they came down pretty hard because we had quite the scare. So they're trying to avoid another Quadriga, just like the US is now trying to avoid FTX.
Mm-hmm.
So that, obviously informative. And I think losing money is a good, like, yes, it sucked. Losing Bitcoin sucked, but it also makes you a little bit more cognizant for in the future if, as we hodl and, it goes up slowly, like there's a lot more on the line if you're 10 years in hodling than if you're only like a year in, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so obviously self-custody is such an important topic. It's always an important topic. And this is a perfect example of why we need to have, truly understand self-custody, because we are our own banks if we're using Bitcoin in the way that it was intended to be used, which is peer-to-peer and being your own bank. So what was your biggest, obviously it sucked to lose money, and like, how has it changed your perspective on how you talk to people about getting their Bitcoin off of exchanges and helping them, on the road to sovereignty,
Yeah.
self-sovereignty?
I do recognize that everyone's not ready. And so I think the more important step is to just own a little bit, because then
Mhm.
you'll start to go down maybe that rabbit hole. But I do don't hold all of it on the exchange, because there is still a risk there.
Yeah.
I do understand that some people maybe want to trade, right? If you want to have an order that, and here's the thing, I'm not a proponent that's going to say like hold it indefinitely. Like people need to live their life, right? If you're under a lot of stress because you're having trouble struggling paying bills, struggling to pay down your mortgage, maybe selling a little bit like will make a big impact to your life in terms of how you day to day, live, right? If a family vacation is more meaningful, right? Like what are you going to wait until your kids are grown up, right? Until you're retired and you can't like do those hikes or whatever. Like I think there's a balance that we have to strike too. So I'm not in the camp of never sell, especially if you're, if there are things that you could be missing out that are like I find experiences and memories a little bit more important in some
Sure.
ways. And so there's that. But so if you are going to hold a bit, like obviously don't hold it on one exchange, but definitely, start the self custody journey. And it can be simple. Like you don't have to go crazy, right? Because if you go crazy, then you might forget how to get it back, right? If you encrypt, like say you create a drive, you encrypt it, and then you forget the password, like you're locked out. So people have lost money that way, right? Like
Yeah.
if you set up something that is way too complicated, it can be dangerous. So just start simple, and then as your wealth grows, you have time to kind of learn to redo your security system. So I think it's more important just to start, get a wallet, get that going. Yeah.
And how often do you suggest, like, for folks who are listening, if, because we all have like our certain setups, right? Whether they're single
Yeah.
sig, multi-sig, passphrase, whatever, a couple different wallets, like how often do you suggest revisiting your configuration? Once a
You've got to,
year, once every 6 months, a quarter, every couple
yeah.
years, when a new thing comes out? Like how often should people
Yeah.
be, looking at this?
I do think once a year you should at least do some sort of transaction. Because here's the other thing, like a lot of us in the Bitcoin space, right? We just hodl, we just buy and send it to the same addresses. Sometimes maybe we create a new one, but it's a lot easier to just keep sending it to the same address. So people get lazy. And what happens then is, let's say you do want to send it, you don't remember the PIN. So let's
Mm-hmm.
say you blow the PIN. Usually some wallets, like 3 times the wallet erases, right? Or it locks you out. So then you're relying on like how you backed up your keys. And if you
Mm-hmm.
don't remember how to access that, you've got a problem. So at least if you're doing, if you remember the PIN, that's already helpful, because you don't have to go back, because presumably you've got a system that's maybe geographically spread or something else, or maybe it's multi-sig, like whatever it is, it shouldn't be super easy once you get, to a certain part of the game. And
Yeah.
So to do that, right, like you're going to have to potentially drive or fly somewhere, and that takes time, right, if you want to reaccess it. And usually it's like when you really need it, that's when you need it. Like, oh my gosh, something happened. I don't know, my dog got hit by a car. I need money now. I need to sell. I can't access it. Like that's the most stressful part. And then you lock yourself out. So having two wallets is helpful too, right? Like a backup, like a clone. So in case something happens, right? In case you lose it, in case your house catches fire, like those are the kind of things you should be thinking about. And as a volunteer firefighter, yeah, houses burn down. And the way that houses are built, they're built very fiat these days. And what I mean by that is in the like olden days, we used to build out of wood. All our furniture was natural and wood. We are using so many synthetics to
Mhm.
furnish like the content fire. So the
Yeah.
room it contents fire. If you look at, if you just like Google like how long it takes for a house to catch fire, they've done studies. It takes within like 5 minutes you can flash over in a modern kind of home because using all these synthetics, all these plastics, and flash over is everything in the room catches fire, right? It becomes volatile, like volatilizes, which we'll get into the tire stuff. So it becomes volatile, and it's not really, it's not the stuff that actually burns. It's when things kind of like heat up, they become the fuel, like they go into the smoke, and that is what catches fire. And so if you have an old home and you have stuff made out of real wood, you have cotton, you have wool, like carpets, those things can take like 40 minutes to flash over. So we're talking about a huge time difference in terms of how long your house, like how you can safely get your things, get your family out. So those are things to think about because it can be just within 5 minutes, everything's like in that room is gone, right?
Wow.
I know.
I wouldn't have, my mind wouldn't have gone there until you
No,
just said
I
that, and of
know.
course, you think about, like, you see those pictures of the nylon curtains just
Yes,
in 2
I
seconds
do.
going out, right? And so,
Go down the
uh,
YouTube rabbit hole of watching like the contents burn in a house. Like it's insane.
obviously we can go down this whole path, but I wanna spend just a minute or 2. How did you get involved in being a volunteer firefighter? That's badass.
I'm in a really small community, and kind of the fire department is a central part of our town. And it's a
Mhm.
good way to kind of meet people, to give back, and also play with cool toys, like big toys. You know, you get to drive the truck, you get to use the extrication equipment. Like I make cars convertibles. I'm on the extrication team, so like that is. It's a legitimate thing that we do to get people out if there's, if they're having the worst day of their life. And so it
Oh,
can be fun. Like there's obviously like it's not always fun, right?
yeah,
There's some PTSD and stuff, but overall you're doing it because you want to help, right? And so
totally.
yeah,
Well, it sounds like you've got a helping spirit that lives within you since you've been working in energy and climate and,
yeah,
obviously now Bitcoin and, how do we get tires into Bitcoin? Like, can you help everybody understand, like, this to me is fascinating. I think, there's so many waste streams out there, right? We've got all the methane with the cows or the flared gas, whatever. Tires isn't something that comes to mind, but when you say it, right, when you go get a new set of tires, they have to have your tire waste fee, la la la. Um, how does this work with turning tires into Bitcoin and, in a way that's obviously not, just burning it and polluting the environment?
yeah. So this is a totally different kind of business model where what we're doing is we're getting paid to take in the waste stream, and usually, like if you are throwing out waste into the landfill, there's something called a tipping fee. So anyone that has waste has to pay money to have it disposed of, right? Because the landfill has certain costs, and down the road, even to close the landfill, there will be costs to a landfill. So people have to pay it. And so the beautiful thing about that is that we accept tires and we get paid for that. So it's like we're getting paid for energy. So there is a bit of a trade off, right? Because what we are doing is we are thermally deconstructing it. So we're not burning tires, we are changing them chemically into fuel feedstocks. So the tire it gets put in a vertical reactor, and we have a number on our site. And the tires go in, and they almost like bake over 11 hours, and
You're
under high
baking tires. You're not baking Toll House cookies. You're baking some tires. All right.
tires. And so the conversion that happens is because the tire becomes an oil that can go into the
Okay.
diesel generator, right? To fuel
Whoa.
the car. Yep. And we don't even have to mine Bitcoin. We can just sell that. to other folks that would like to use that. So we have there's optionality, right? There's synthetic gas, syngas, which has the same composition as methane. So that's another feedstock. So that can also be burned.
Okay.
There is this black kind of like charcoal that's left over that also has BTU value, and we have sold that to another industrial client that uses it for BTU value as in like energy content. And the
Okay,
last
so hold on. So just to be clear for the audience, BTU value, is that like energy density? Like what it is?
fuels, or yeah, it's just a way that like certain fuels, like if we think of natural gas, often like people give BTU prices or energy content. And the fourth byproduct, so there's four. So there's oil, synthetic gas, the carbon, and the fourth one is steel. Because 25% of a tire
Oh,
is
right, all the little
yeah, they're all throughout because it gives it that rigidity because
mhm,
cars on the road, they're heavy, the tires take a pounding. So there's the steel that we can sell then for scrap for recycling. So there's
yeah.
four products and we get paid, and then all of them we could either sell or use the energy products to mine Bitcoin, which we do. But that the cool thing is, again, like I said, there is optionality. So depending on where we are in sort of the market, maybe it makes more sense to sell the energy. Or if we're in a jurisdiction where there are high tipping fees, but also high energy costs to like sell the energy. Maybe it
Mhm.
makes more sense there. If there's low energy costs, or like depending on where we're in the bear market, if it's super profitable to mine, then you want to be mining. So it's nice from that perspective. And you don't even have to mine Bitcoin per se, because we can create the infrastructure of the reactors and power any kind of data center. I mean, that could be an AI data center, right? It could be a government, because we have been working with the Department of Defense just to potentially using it as a solution. So imagine that you are fully unreliant on fuels anywhere else because you've got tires as a feedstock supply, right? You can run your own data center, and whether that could be just proprietary, could be defense data center that is not, again, disconnected from the grid, disconnected from like the power grid, from the internet grid, from everything. So it's just, you can be very self-sufficient and sovereign. So I think that's kind of a neat technology in terms of that. It gives you that optionality. And one final thing that I'll say is, yes, maybe it's not as exciting as like cow poop or landfill gases, but it's exciting in the way that no one has really found what to do with tires,
Yeah.
right? And there's increasingly, landfills are starting to ban tires because they leach toxins into the
Mhm.
groundwater, into the air. There's still volatile organic compounds that are given off. And more places are saying no to creating children's playgrounds, because it
Mhm.
used to be used for tires used to be used for that, because there are volatile organic compounds that are released in the soccer fields or the playgrounds. So
Yeah.
now they're starting to come up with, oh, we have to coat the tires in something so these aren't released. But again, it's not the perfect solution. And honestly, I wouldn't want my kid playing on this kind of thing, knowing
Mm-mm.
that there are some anecdotal evidence that there may be negative health effects that kids face from that.
Yeah.
So like, really, what do? You put it in a landfill and it just leaches toxins? No, we have a solution that then changes it into an energy byproduct, so we don't have to pull more oil out of the ground, right? So there is some displacement of negative externalities from the act of oil extraction and the GHGs
Mhm.
that are released during that. So I think it's kind of beautiful in that it is an alternative solution to a current environmental problem where there's a billion tires thrown out around the world every year, right? 360 million in the US alone,
Wow.
like consistently, like just
Yeah,
landfill.
because it's a consume it depletes, like, you don't get to keep them forever. I think this is just as sexy as cow poo, if not even sexier. Um, cow poo is not sexy, it just makes, I love, obviously for all of us as Bitcoiners and environmentalists and people who care about making the world better than we found it, with all these tools and technologies, like, there are so many cool little niches of opportunities here to like vacuum up things that are causing a problem and then convert them into something that causes a solution,
Yeah.
and that's like ultra cool and sexy. What do you notice, like, Are you guys just based in the United States, or are you all over the world?
The intent is to go worldwide, right? Because it's a problem that is worldwide, right? Like
Yeah.
some places like Japan, collect them and put them into EFW facilities, so energy from waste. So, they are burning them for power, for example. But most
Okay.
they're still being landfilled. North America, we have a lot of land. We tend to landfill, right? Rather than burn the waste that we have. And so we know, so we're currently in Raleigh, North Carolina, and our
Okay.
next site will be in Virginia. But there are certain states that have very similar waste management policies, and strategically, those places make the most sense to go to because we can get through the environmental approvals a lot quicker,
Mhm.
right? And then also, there's certain states that have a lot more collection of tires or tire facilities. So one thing too that before I joined, I didn't really know was 10% of the tires that are made just don't even make it to the cars because they have like minor defects, but because
Mm.
it's liability, they just get thrown out. The day that I visited the facility, most of the tires actually that have been delivered there, because we take tires for three to 4 days supply, no more, right? And so most of the
Oh.
tires I saw there were brand new. So it's like, it's not just like tires that get used that get thrown out. It's just like you make them and you throw them out because they don't meet specs. So definitely, a problem there.
Yeah, that I wouldn't have thought of that, but of course, that's like, what do you do with all that waste of
Yeah.
those
And
defects?
in Kuwait, they have like deserts full of tires, just waste. But there's in Kuwait, one of these places has caught fire and it's just like constant, like it's just on
Mhm.
fire right now.
Yeah,
And it's
I've seen, like,
UN
stories about this.
into the air. And so we have a solution for that because we don't, so if a tire is just burning, it's not burning in like the best way. It's not the most efficient way. And there would be toxins released, right? But if we're thermally converting it, we're kind of converting it in a way back to what it came from, because a tire is rubber, right?
Mhm,
Steel. And then also petroleum, right? Petroleum
mhm.
goes into making a tire. So we're putting it back to like we're creating oil again. So it's almost like a reversal of that process in some way.
That's so cool. Ho
Yeah.
And so how much energy does it take to do this? Like, what's your input on the energy
Yeah,
there?
so it does take a little bit of energy to get that process started because we have to heat it up. But in that vertical reactor, once you get it going, it kind of self continues. And this technology is very different from pyrolysis. So, pyrolysis is a technology that people might have heard. A lot of times it's used for energy from waste facilities, but pyrolysis is very similar to firefighting, right? Because when something heats up in firefighting, right, it pyrolyzes, so it volatilizes, so it gets hot enough that it becomes a gas, right? So your phone, your furniture heats up enough that it becomes a gas, and that is what burns. That is actually what burns. When we think of fire, it's not the actual wood that's burning, it's the wood pyrolyzing and then burning. So what facilities that use pyrolysis do is they're constantly heating it like all the time to get it to volatilize and then burn, right? So that requires consistently large amounts of energy, and it's not like the best way to do that because you have to keep putting energy in. Whereas our process, we start and then it continues because we don't use high temperature. That's the other thing. So if you're using pyrolysis, you're burning it at high temperatures to get rid of it, whereas we're kind of like, around 250 degrees and kind of sticking around there. And so, for example, if you think of like a kiln,
Mhm,
or like a cement kiln, right? Sometimes uh, they use waste as part of their heating process, right? Those are
mhm.
going up to like over 1,000 degrees. So, high heat process versus low heat process. So again, we're being much more efficient with the energy that we use, and that way, I think we're much more competitive than a facility that's like, oh, we're going to burn garbage or use pyrolysis to
Mhm.
mine Bitcoin because they're going to have to constantly find an energy source to burn, right? So yes, maybe they get paid for the garbage, but they have to heat it at a higher temperature to keep that energy sustained.
And, like, what types of, inputs can get used in this, more efficient way versus
Yeah.
the
So
pyrolysis?
so we're trying to so we've modeled the process. We've been going since about 2016, tons of iterations, like 10,000 start stops. And so what we've done is we've got it like we understand the process, how it works with tires very well. Like we've got a very consistent profile now.
Mhm,
And so we want something that has petroleum in it. So down the road, we want to do some R&D around plastics, right? Because
mhm.
they're also petroleum based. So it can be a
Yeah.
similar type of model, but we're not going to go into something that's very, very different, like in terms of a different feedstock. And the one more cool thing that I will say is, so I used to work with heavy industry, right? I spent a decade working with large final emitters, so steel, cement, traditional mining, and I'm used to sort of like working on the alternative fuels file. Like they wanted to use, various feedstocks as an alternative to, let's say, coal or coke or natural gas, right? So waste made sense. And so, but I'm used to these companies like thinking in terms of like we have byproducts maybe that we can sell, right? Or we're co-creating some sort of product. And
Mhm.
when we create this oil, yes, the easiest thing to do, but the lowest value is to just burn it or sell it for burning. But if you can further refine it into a more value added product, so instead of selling it for, let's say, $4 a gallon, you're selling it for 80 because it becomes a chemical feedstock to, or chemical input to another process, for
Mhm.
example, a cleaning agent, then that's better for us potentially is if we then take the next step to refine it. So we are doing some R&D into what other products can we make from the oil so that we can sell it, for example, for $80 instead of 4. And again, optionality, maybe it makes more sense during a bear market to take that, upgrade it, refine it, and then sell it. And
Totally.
yeah,
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. So, I've been we're working on do you know the Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol, guys?
I have, yeah, a little bit.
And so we're talking about, and then obviously Margot and Troy and Daniel Batten and everybody who's awesome in the environmental space. We're talking about like how are we going to talk with, you know, uh, mainstream finance, the green finance world, obviously the
Yeah.
sustainable activism world, and of course, the minute you say Bitcoin, people freak out. And we're working on creating I
Asset.
know, and you need to be on this working group because we were like, let's get on this work. We're creating a working group so that we can all put our brain power together and look at all these different conferences all over the world that we can cross pollinate the
Yeah.
Bitcoin message to and talk about what are these solutions and how are these things getting financed? Is this something that you guys have a fund or you're just doing one? Can people invest in the company? It seems like it would be
Yeah, so
good part of a fund.
we are raising to finish the second site. So we're almost completing the raise, but we are still looking for some capital there. And there will be further sites, right? Like after that one. So we've got a few others identified.
That's and
So,
it
so
sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go.
no, sorry, maybe I mentioned it, but maybe I didn't. So our power costs compared to other miners, like we get paid for our power, right? But the
Mhm,
the trade-off is we are capital intense because we're not just building out the mine, like we are an integrated
mhm,
facility where we build out our own energy system. So we have to build out the reactors at the site, so they have a certain capital cost. It's about 75 million to set up the whole site with miners,
uh-huh,
and the energy system for about 8 megawatts worth. And so that trade-off is capital versus operating costs. Our operating costs are far lower because if you look at operating costs, about 80% of a mine is energy costs of the
okay.
operating costs. So it's a huge chunk, right? So we're cutting that out in a way because we are, like I said, getting the power, but the capital is a lot more intense.
I get that. And so let me ask you this, how, because thinking in terms of the burning pile of tires in Kuwait, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
obviously horrible for the environment, that's horrible for the community, it's horrible for the groundwater, all the whole 9 yards. Um, how are you noticing any difference as whether it's here in the States or at any of these other locations around the world? What's the impact that you see with the local community in an environmental, perspective and from a social perspective in is it cleaning up the community so that you're not having all of this other just excess tire junk around?
I think first of all, they have to care, right? And have
Mhm,
the money to deal with the problem. So we are having some conversations with folks in the Middle East, but that's a longer term kind of process, right? Again,
mhm.
because different regulations there. But obviously recognizing it as an opportunity. I think where it gets harder is I don't know how So I've traveled to a few sort of developed countries, or developing countries, right? I've
Mhm.
been to several jurisdictions. Actually, just last month I went to four in Latin America, right, in South America, and going to places like that, you really see there is no tire sort of like tires are just thrown out all over. They're all over the streets,
Yeah.
driving around. Some people are using them to like maybe hold things down, but there is, and similar in Africa, right? They're just thrown outside of the road. And in Africa too, actually related to health, what happens a lot of times is the water pools in the tire because the tire is like this, and
Mhm.
mosquitoes
Yeah.
hatch there, and there's a lot of problems like Zika virus, and people aren't getting vaccinated against some of those things that are very preventable in Africa, and it's causing health problems. So you're almost solving kind of like for two problems in places like that if you create a collection system where it's a you're mitigating the mosquitoes,
Yeah.
b and some of the most beautiful stories in Bitcoin I am hearing out of Africa, right, where miners are coming in and subsidizing the development of a small scale renewable site that is
Mhm.
then creating power for a village in Africa. So grid or shoot, it's BBCGS, I think. They're the folks that are in Virunga National Park. That is like the
Yeah.
most beautiful story, I think, in all of Bitcoin. And so, you're taking a village that had no power to
Mhm.
being able to bring in enough capital then to build out the power plant
Right.
and therefore not only give light and pumping. Like that's a big thing too. It's like it's not just like, oh, we have to now go to bed because it's dark. It's also I don't have to walk 2 hours to go get water, right?
Right. Dirty water.
Dirty water. and
Yeah.
and that makes for a huge difference there. But then now we have electricity, we can bring in a local textile mill or a chocolate production facility, right? Like real kind of like manufacturing. And it's not like industrial scale where it's like a cement plant, but it's still an important part where you are now creating a lot of jobs that people maybe before went into the militia or mercenaries in Africa, which is quite common. So now
Yeah.
you're creating a much kind of better lifestyle for the community. So same thing there, where if you create tire centers. So again, because the tires they can be distributed in some way, you can, and our reactors are modular, so you could do a smaller scale reactor where you only have one instead of like 8 or 6 of the reactors. So you
Mhm.
have one because it's smaller feedstock supply, and maybe it powers the local hospital, or now it can power like just a little clinic, right? So I think you know it's really cool what miners are enabling in terms of small scale grid build outs, like
Yeah.
creating these little microgrids that doesn't make sense to set up the wires, the transmission, distribution. So you're just creating very local opportunities. So I think those are the stories that haven't really hit mainstream yet. I know
No,
there's
and we
a
need
lot
to get them out.
of countries that are starting to look into what is happening there. So Dirty Coin,
Yep.
Alana, right?
Alana is the
Oh, yeah,
best. We
she's
love
so
you, Alana.
but she's telling that story, and I
Yeah.
want to see more of Virunga National Park being told. And actually, it was really funny because last week, like the World Economic Forum, which is so anti Bitcoin generally, they're like, "Oh, look at this! Look at Bitcoin miners helping these women make chocolate, and they're keeping all the resources in Africa instead of like just sending out the cocoa beans. So like all the value added stuff gets." Made in like France where you have like Ferrero Rocher and whatnot. But no, all that money stays now in Africa, which I think again is pretty cool. So
It
yeah.
is so cool. I know I love stories, with Bitcoin for Peace to me, like what you said, a lot of this, the folks, a lot of time they think, well, this is the only option I have is to join a militia, or a gang or whatever it is. And so that's not a peaceful way of living. That's not a peaceful community. That's not inner peace. That's none of it. And so how are we linking the dots of Bitcoin and mining and adoption to creating a more peaceful way of living for individuals and communities and companies and organizations and countries, And so I think when people can connect the dots through these stories and through the visualization of the stories, right? Like that is super important, especially if you're interviewing somebody who was a surgeon who had to go operate by candlelight and sometimes it would blow out. And then now we've got a Bitcoin mining thing set up, and now he can have a little bit of electricity
Yeah.
so he can do an operation. Like,
Yeah.
that's that story right there. It's like, oh, okay. And I loved what you said about the water too. A lot of people don't really understand the absolute blessing and gift that it is for us to be able to go in many of the rooms of our houses here or apartments in, first world areas, and just go bloop, and then
Yep.
we have clean, relatively clean drinking water that's very safe, 24/7,
Yep.
and I remember for, my 40th birthday a long time ago, I did I did a fundraiser for Charity Water, and it was like I think Scott Harrison was the person who started Charity Water. He used to
Okay.
be a big nightclub promoter. It was partying, all this crazy stuff, and he had this like aha, like, is this really going to be my life? Screw that. And then
Not my legacy.
yeah, and he was just like, "I wanna go help build water wells," So it's such a cool project. I love what he's up to, and I just when you said that, my mind was like, "Hmm, is he a Bitcoiner? Does he understand about Bitcoin mining?" Because Charity Water does, like, tons and tons and tons of these types of,
Oh,
uh,
interesting.
campaigns, and people will go do, like, a walkathon for some
For a
whatever it
water
might be.
well.
And so I'm just curious. It's like, I'm gonna reach out to him. It's like,
Yeah.
dude, do you know about this stuff? We
Yeah.
got to get your places set up, because that's a limitation of obviously getting clean water to different people is the power. And so if Bitcoin can solve for that somehow, but yeah, you're totally. I loved also the Zika virus, and how is Bitcoin solving for the? I mean,
Well, that's
it's
down the road. Like,
incredible.
if we go into Africa, we can see
Yeah.
that. Yeah, because
It,
the founders of the company PRTI that I advise, they originally came from the medical field, right? And one of them worked with Doctors Without Borders, and they're
mhm.
still like in the health space a little bit. So I think, like, connecting the two works, and that connection, that intersection point in Africa would be interesting.
I think so too, and I think again, just like, when you said it, because it just, of course, I've seen that before with like whether it's on a kid's playground with the tire swing or whatever it is, like
Yeah.
water accumulates, and obviously multiply that by billions of tires and millions of tires. That's a lot of mosquitoes out there, and a lot of people getting sick that it's unnecessary, right? And so it's so cool to me. So what are you up to now? Like, what's going on? What's on the horizon? Are you still like you're working with these folks? You guys are building
Yeah.
out some things.
Yeah.
Are there other companies around the world that are doing this? Are you guys the only ones?
We're, as far as I know, the only ones that are using tires and are using this kind of a technology. I have
Mhm,
come across at least one company that is interested in doing, like I mentioned, the pyrolysis, where,
mhm,
and then I think there are a lot more folks that are more focused on the methane
mhm,
aspect, right? Like the methane from waste, and there's a whole number of kind of feedstocks. Oh, sorry, one company that I have come across are looking at waste oils. So it's a similar process where,
mhm,
like, I know there are collections where companies go around and take the waste oil, for example, from restaurants, right?
mhm.
So they
Yeah,
provide
like
that
bio
service.
oil. Yeah,
That is oil that could be theoretically burned, right? So
totally.
there's so many different business models. And technically that's a biofuel. So it
Yeah.
is, carbon neutral. And I love to see people just experimenting more and more with opportunities. And I do think, because we're about to go into the halving in, is it a month from now? What is it? A month and
Ish.
a half
Yeah.
in?
Ah.
So, it's going to get a lot more expensive. Right. Your revenue's cut in half. So unless you have a very cheap power supply contract, I think more it's going to become a little bit more popular to find these cheap, low cost or negative cost, as in we're getting
Mhm.
paid to take waste fuel to then mine Bitcoin.
Yeah, because like what you said, like, you're either gonna have that upfront CapEx, and then you
Mhm.
have the free fuel, or you've gotta have those operating costs
Yeah.
of your inputs, and so this seems like an interesting model as long as, you're not overspending at the beginning with your
Yeah.
cap
But
and
the one thing that I will say is, so miners, right? Their CapEx, their biggest expense is typically the mining equipment, right? And
mhm,
but the mining equipment these days, it gets swapped out. Sometimes now, even like you're looking at 3 year cycles, right? 3 to 5 years, depending where you are. Um, Obviously, some miners will probably buy older machines because they're
Mhm.
cheaper. They won't get the latest and greatest, but maybe they have cheap power, so then they'll buy machines that are, discounted per like dollars per terahash.
Yeah.
But when you build, so the reactor, typically, like that's a very short capital cycle for a mining machine. When you're talking about like
Yeah.
steel, cement, heavy industry, something like our facility, the actual energy generating facility, you're talking about decades, right? Like you're talking at least 2 decades, maybe 3 decades. Like steel plants, right? Their kilns are like 3 decades, 4 decades. So it's
Yeah.
not like you're constantly like rebuilding the reactors. So that
Mhm.
CapEx gets distributed over a lot more years
How
versus
long
like
does it
mining
how long
machines.
does it how long does it take to set up a facility?
The hardest, well, the permitting will take a lot
Really?
longer. Yeah, yeah. So good question. I think like within a year with permits and stuff is feasible. Again, like it's one of those things where it's like, yes, it takes this time. Are there supply chain issues, right?
Yeah.
Is there like hiccups with the permitting? And that's again why we prefer to work in jurisdictions where it's very clear and very similar to what we've already worked in.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so once you're up, again, the energy infrastructure stays, and it's just the mining equipment that might need to be swapped out more often. But it,
And are you getting like the people who are in the policymakers, like once you guys are presenting this to them, and you're showing that this is working and it's valuable for the community, et cetera, are they like, so what's this Bitcoin stuff? Tell me about Bitcoin. Like, are you finding that they're like more excited and interested?
I think generally we tend to refer to it as a data center because people understand that.
Okay. But like the ones, if are you having anybody who's just like, oh, what are you doing in your data center? Like, and then they're interested in Bitcoin.
Yeah, I, I think it will get easier.
Cool.
Definitely just easier to like. Why even go there right now? You know what I mean? Like,
Cool. No, I'm just curious, like if you had, because a lot of people, I noticed, I was having this conversation in Madeira, and some folks were like, yeah, we're going to build these products and services, and we're just going to tell them that we're streaming sats, but it's not really Bitcoin yet. And they'll just do, this thing. And I'm kind of like, is that really the best approach? Because eventually they're going to know it's Bitcoin and they're going to be excited. So is it better to just, put the cat out of the bag? And, but I think that there's a lot of ways to
yeah,
approach this. So I'm
I
always
think
just
it
curious
depends
how
on where
people,
you are, right?
yeah,
Like if you're in even like Republican versus Democrats, right? Like in Canada, the liberals are very much against Bitcoin, whereas the conservatives are much more for it, right? So you always have to think strategically,
right.
right?
Know your audience, right?
Know your audience.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah, totally. Well, okay.
It might
So
be more fancy now that everyone's got, now that the ETFs have launched and people are, BlackRock's advertising, we're in a bull market again. So maybe it's like people are more excited about that, right?
yeah, it seems like there's, people like who would not touch this before, because of the Black Rocks and everything.
Yeah,
It's like, I mean, they're the top of funnel marketing department for us and it's
yeah,
like, cool, great, get them excited. Okay, let's start getting people to say, well, I don't really want an ETF. I want my own Bitcoin, right? And so but it's social proof. It's
yeah,
just straight up social proof, and it's social proof from the biggest money manager on planet Earth. So when when EF Hutton talks, everyone listens, right? And so when BlackRock does something, you're like, oh, okay, maybe I guess I should reconsider my hostile attitude toward Bitcoin.
yeah. Now Arizona is contemplating putting it in their pension, like
I know.
changing. Yeah,
It is, and it's so cool to see, these dominoes, I always I think of, like, in terms of the orange domino effect, and I'm like, these big players, or whether you're an entertainer, a sports person, a pension fund, a government, and it's like, doop, everything downstream of your little orange domino starts to fall into a place of understanding, hopefully,
yeah,
and not being afraid, and being more curious and willing to look at Bitcoin from a different perspective. So again, it's that social proof.
yeah.
So we're humans. We need that. It's like, who do we trust? I don't, who's this not anonymous person that disappeared? No, it's like,
I find
that's so
that
weird to most of us. Right. And you're like, what? So I think it's really cool. What do you have? What kind of big dreams do you have for the rest of, uh, for the rest of the year and for the rest of your
yeah.
life, Mags? What are you,
Oh,
what are you
the rest
dreaming
of
of
my
these days?
life. Oh
What
my
are you
goodness.
dreaming of, sister?
philosophical.
You know, I gotta go there. It's all about peace, love, and granola. Let's go.
No, short term. So I really would like to write a book
Nice.
that kind of highlights sort of the good news from an environmental standpoint around Bitcoin. So that's something
Yep.
that I'm working on. And like, you start thinking about like what did I do in life? So I'm like, I feel like it'd be a nice accomplishment. Like, yes, I contributed to Bitcoin by doing this, like telling those stories. So I think that's what I would like to do. Long term, I don't know, man. Just be on a beach.
Yeah, dude, totally. Well, we're gonna be book
Thank you
accountability
so.
buddies, so I
Sorry.
think that remember, we're
Oh
gonna
yes,
be
we are going to be
account
book accountability buddies.
yeah.
So
I it's well, we need it. It's like,
I know.
it's lonely writing and being, getting like, "Hey, read my thing, edit this," and it's like, yeah, so it's good to have
How does
a
this
little
like
sisterhood and but yeah, so we'll rock
sitting
on
down
that.
and writing is like
Oh
getting
my
to
god.
that sitting down and writing stage is always like the toughest. It's like, oh, I don't want to write
I
today.
know. It's like, do you
Blank
know,
page.
oh gosh, hold on, I gotta get the book. Uh
So I'm seeing a lot of sparkles in your room.
Yeah,
A
you're
lot
gonna
of
see lots of
glitter.
sparkles over here. I'm like the sparkle fairy. It's my coffee. Oh yeah, Stephen Pressfield. So here, these two books, they're on my altar: The War of Art and Turning Pro, and they're really great books. And I literally will just thumb it open, and it'll be like, a two-page thing about the professional creator mindset or getting through your inner creative battles and all this stuff. And because a lot of us, I think, whether you're a musician, a writer, a filmmaker, whatever, choose your medium. Um, we think like, oh, we have to wait till inspiration strikes and I'm just going to do it. It's
So
like,
you're going to be waiting forever.
yeah, you're going to wait forever. And it's just like, the inspiration strikes when the pen is in your hand and
Yeah.
you need to put the pen in your hand every day or whatever it is that your tool is. And so it's nice to have it's like going to the gym.
Yeah.
It's easier to go to do yoga or the gym if you're like,
But
"Cool,
you're
I'll see you there at 9 o'clock. Let's go. Woo." Oh.
have like a friend and accountability friends that's like, hey, we said we'd work out at 8 a.m. Where are you?
Totally, and you give permission to each other to, call each other out and just be like, "Dude, you keep saying you're gonna come, but you're not coming, so what's going on? Let's talk about it." So, it's important.
You mentioned like inspiration. I actually find that when I'm hiking with my dog and I'm walking and doing things, sometimes the best ideas come, but it's like so frustrating. You're like, this is the idea. How do I write? Like you're like writing it in your head as you're hiking, and then afterwards you get home, you're like, I don't even remember.
Use a voice
Yeah,
recorder on your phone.
I know.
Yeah, just like that could be your friend and same thing like when when you wake up in the middle of the night and you get that idea, you should always have a pen and paper
No,
next to your bed
okay.
and then don't get out of bed. Don't let your feet touch the ground. Just write that sucker down. And because it's gonna fly away and
Yeah.
you don't know if you'll ever get it back. And I know we always think like, no, no, I have a great memory. I'll remember. No, you
I
won't.
know, I know. I'm like, oh yeah, this was a cool dream. I'll tell somebody later about it. It's like I don't remember anything.
Totally. Awesome. So, are you gonna be at any events this year? Am I gonna get to see
Yes.
you?
Yes. So I am emceeing Main Stage Prague,
Yeah,
and
dude, that's amazing.
I
Oh
know
my
Prague
gosh.
was so beautiful. So Bitcoin Prague, it's in June. And what I love there is that was my first time going to Prague, and it is such a beautiful city. It's such a walkable city, and there's so many cool things to see. Like you do the conference, and then afterwards you go out on the town, right? And it's just so beautiful there. So I really
Oh,
enjoyed that. And the cool thing too is like there are different Bitcoiners there. Then you always see the same folks, right? When you
yeah.
go to the place, the United States conferences.
Mhm.
I do like Pacific Bitcoin because it's so close, on West Coast, so
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
and high quality. And then I'm also going to Bedford.
Yeah, Peter's thing, huh?
I have
Woo-hoo.
never gone to London, so going to the UK is kind of cool, and a lot of good folks will be there. So I'm looking forward to catching up. So those are the main three that I have planned.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Yeah, you're right, and I just got back from Madeira 2 nights ago, and,
Go.
oh my gosh, I
Beautiful
mean,
location.
so beautiful. Of course, it's just cool and just exactly what you said. Like, I liked certainly there's tons and tons of awesome familiar faces, but there was a whole bunch of new folks I've never seen, and I'm just like, "Yeah, who are you? Now, where are you from? This is so cool." And I think
European food. Oh my God. Like,
yeah, it was
you go
amazing.
there and you have the cheese and like everything just tastes so much better.
It's so good, and it's
Yeah.
just there's something I don't know, there's just a different vibe over there, and my favorite part, I mean, of course, is seeing everybody, but they had a wonderful kids area at the
Oh, okay.
conference, and
That's
it was put on by there was an adult kind of facilitating, but then all the kids were, like, co-leading different activities, and it was all these different ages, and just to see all these children running around and just like having their fun, whether they were little ones playing in a ball pit or games, or the little older ones that were just cruising around the stadium, like, haha, it's like their camp, and I think it is so missing and needed
yeah,
regularly, whether it's a Bitcoin conference, whether it's a personal development, business development, it doesn't matter. Like,
because it's gonna limit who can attend, I think, too.
totally, and then if you're somebody who has to keep going to, like, the environmental things and,
Yeah.
"Mommy's going away again," you start to possibly have a little resentment as a kid, and so
Mhm.
if you get to go,
Yeah.
you're like, "Yay, I get to be included," and your family starts to speak the same language,
Yeah.
so if we have Bitcoiners speaking the same language and our young kids are around all of it and they're around other peers, kids listen to each other instead of,
Yeah.
us
Yeah.
old stinky old adults, right? And so I think it's really,
Little
really
more
valuable.
instilling happening at school now.
Totally, right? And so it's like you're gonna listen to maybe, within a couple years, depending of, how old you are,
Yep.
who your peers are. So it's like, why not create a cool space for them to go play and flourish and have some fun in the Bitcoin space? So I can't wait to see. I pray that every single event has a kids area from now on. That was, like, seriously the coolest thing.
Nice.
Um, yeah, it's definitely.
Nashville is supposed to, but
I don't know. I mean, that's gonna be a big event. They should totally
yes,
have a kids area.
get too big for me. I'm like, oh, I have to. It's a little much. I like the new conferences when they're like newer, smaller. I do regret not going to Madeira. I think the first time is always a little special. But yeah, it gets a little too big for me, I think.
Yeah, I know Nashville's gonna be amazing, and it's big. I
Yeah.
know. I'm all like I lost a few pounds when I came back, and I'm just like, I ate 3 meals a day. I didn't, like, starve myself or
Yummy.
anything, and I'm not, like, trying to lose weight, but it was like, "Oh, okay, uh, whatever." Uh, but you're just cruising around because the venue's so big,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of activity, so it's great, though, and obviously walking around the city was amazing and seeing everybody, so, um, where can everybody find you, Mags? Where should they come and
I'm
check you out?
on Twitter, crypto, sorry, underscore no, crypto underscore mags. And then I'm on Nostr too, but I think the easiest way is to go to my Twitter account and then
And then we can go to from
exactly,
there. So,
exactly.
okay, so you've got crypto underscore mags. Any plans
Yes.
to change it to Bitcoin
Now,
mags or
and I know people ask, but you know what? It's called the funnel. So they come in expecting crypto and then it's just
right?
Bitcoin content. So boom, maybe you'll learn more about Bitcoin that way.
There you go. Boom shakalaka. It's like it's the best of crypto. Yeah, no, that's super cool.
I do
Uh,
have, like, I notice, not just Bitcoin people follow me. So I'm like, well, if they're getting learning about Bitcoin more through me, that's helpful.
it's super helpful, and I know a lot of people, obviously it's like a spectrum, and I think we're all in spectrum this way, and we're all in spectrum of Bitcoin understanding, because like, but everybody's going to become a Bitcoiner at some
Yeah,
point, and so however you get involved, whether it's through number go up or crypto or
yeah,
environment or whatever, human rights, like, or art, get in, and it's not just like Bitcoin. We want to welcome everybody in a way that feels comfortable in their
for
own
sure.
language,
Yeah,
and so I love that you're doing that, and I'm so happy to see you, and I can't wait for us to work on our books together.
yes,
uh
yes.
I know we'll talk when we jump off of here for a couple of minutes, but yeah, I'm so excited. Well, hopefully I'll see you at one of these conferences somewhere.
Yeah,
I'm putting my schedule together for the rest of the
come
year,
to
so
Prague. Have
I
the
want.
tasty food in Prague.
Oh my god, I would love to come to Prague. I know I asked, Mateus, I was like, "Do you want a Bitcoin for Peace panel?" He's like, "We're all booked up, sorry." I was like,
Aw.
"Do you want a DJ?" He's like, "No." I'm like, "Okay." Um, I wish I could come see you, but it's okay. No, it's just it might not be the right year for
Okay,
that,
no worries.
but there's some other cool things coming up. I'll, when they're ready, I'll post them. But any last words? So for people who might be listening to this who are environmentalists who are curious about Bitcoin and how can they get started in, understanding Bitcoin, getting their first Bitcoin, what would you say to somebody new who's listening to this podcast?
As an environmentalist, that's a tougher one because I feel like they always come with these preconceived notions. But I think for the environmentalists, definitely, read a little bit about what's happening in Virunga National Park. There's a
Mhm.
beautiful article in the MIT Review written by Nathaniel Popescu about that. But also, I know Alana is releasing her documentary Dirty Coin, I
Mhm.
believe. Oh, so it's being released at the Polish Bitcoin Festival, which I will
Bitcoin
be
Village.
at. So,
You're going to, oh, you're
well,
so
because it's so
lucky.
close to Bedford, right? So I'm going straight from Bedford to visit my grandparents to then Warsaw for the having party there.
Oh
Um,
my god, that's gonna be incredible. I just talked to Tomik today, and he invited me to be a juror for all of the films, and I was like, "Okay, cool." I'm not like Steven Spielberg, so hopefully I can give good feedback, but,
nice.
uh,
So wait,
again,
are
I
you
want
going to that?
say I need to get a sponsor or something. I can't
Oh,
take
okay.
money out of
So
my own
maybe I will
pocket.
see you there.
So maybe fingers crossed, like, let's see.
Okay.
Anyone who's listening who wants to sponsor, DJ Val and to go back to her part of her homeland. So you're Polish, right? And
I am
so
Polish. I was
that's
born.
I'm like a little sliver. I'm half Polish, and so but I didn't really learn a whole lot because my dad didn't teach us a whole lot of Polish, but we did eat a lot of pierogies growing up.
Nice. One of my fondest memories is like making pierogies with my grandma, right? They take,
Yeah,
okay, pierogies are proof of work. They take
dude.
like, I don't know, 3 hours, let's say, fully between like kneading and, making the little pierogies and boiling them. And then you just like eat them really quickly.
They're so good. Oh my gosh, now I'm hungry. I know I haven't had lunch yet, so maybe I'll go eat some lunch before I jump on the next, podcast. I know I've got Rafa Corden, of Simple Proof coming on in like an hour and a half, so that'll be a cool podcast. So whoever's listening, I see we have an awesome audience. Hi, you guys. Thanks for tuning in. And yeah, you guys can text us if you have any questions for Mags, and we'll post this on all the social media channels later, and put it into a podcast format. But tune in later for Rafa, and you guys can also go to where am I? Oh yeah, go get the newsletter. I've got a fun newsletter that I'm starting and trying to keep it kind of fun and playful and sexy, and of course Bitcoin and music and art and peace and granola and all those great things. So go there. Uh, but yeah, what are you going to to say, Mags? I
I was
see
gonna say,
you
so
have your
since you're
hand up.
Polish, I do. I'm Canadian. I'm very polite.
I'm raising my hand on.
Since you're Polish, you might be interested in this. So I started off kind of talking about stories, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the family stories. So my family, my grandma from my dad's side,
Mhm.
Babcia, she had beautiful like house with acreage, gorgeous gardens. Like she had orchards there, like everything basically that you would think of. And that was her mom's house, right?
In Poland.
In Poland, and she lived there. And then the war broke out, and that there was a whole lot of cool stories in there that I won't, because we don't have all this time. But anyways, and some horrible, because war is also horrible. But when the war was over, Poland's borders shifted because that was part of like the treaties and stuff that was signed, and
Mhm.
her land became part of Ukraine, and
Mm.
hers, they had to leave. They lost all of it, right? The acreage, the house, the beautiful gardens. She used to tell me about like these sunflowers. She's like, we used to carry them. They were like shields, like huge, like very fertile soil. And so that is something that, at the whim of government, stroke of a pen, taken away like this whole family legacy, generational wealth, maybe, who knows? You never know now anymore because it's gone. And so, as someone that's partly Polish, maybe that will resonate. And that's kind of
Yeah.
like, that helps me understand Bitcoin because it is family legacy that cannot be confiscated, right?
Yeah.
And another story from my other grandparents' side, so from my mom's side, my grandpa's grandpa was a famous Polish artist, and he still is, right? And he had all these paintings in the house. But again, when the bombings were happening, when they had to escape from their house, they locked it up because they had to go to a more safer place. And when they came back, it had been broken into, and like anything of value was taken, including all the paintings.
Mm.
And so every now and then he would walk down the streets of Krakow and see an art gallery and see the paintings that have been stolen. But obviously, there's no like blockchain that you can like prove ownership or anything like that. It was just
Yeah.
stolen and he couldn't get it back. And it's just something that always kind of like stuck with him, that, it's like such a shame. And, I've actually like Googled, and occasionally something comes up, but it's a couple $1,000s. So it's not like cheap to buy, right? So it's sad, right? Another like lost legacy. So yeah.
Well, you just, if you've got another minute or two, I want to just tap into that just a bit because, um, talking, coming up with Rafa in this conversation and talking about, oh God, the open, the signature, the putting, like how they're doing the electro, like that Peter Todd did, and that's how they're doing this open. Oh my God, what is it? It
So
open
is this
timestamp.
like a proof, like
It's an open timestamp that Peter did, and that's how he did his. So it's basically like a notary for, documents or things that you can put
oh,
on.
okay.
And so, would that be a solution for artists to have physical art or physical things where they're like, "This is, I'm the owner, and I made this cool painting," and then you could put some kind of a stamp on the block, on the
I
Bitcoin
think
blockchain.
it would make sense against forgeries.
Uh
Um,
huh.
I don't know how you would actually prove that. Like, okay, so in the thefts, it can be a little bit harder, right? Because it's like, did you sell it or did you not sell it? If there's some sort of transaction that's like an atomic swap for like the painting versus, or I guess it's on the blockchain. So maybe at the same time, money changes hands to like the wallet. That's more provable, right?
Uh huh.
It's a little bit more challenging, but you can always prove that you owned it at some point,
Uh
right?
huh.
By having your keys for that wallet. So there is a little bit of that. It's the actual, like, was there a sale or was this like taken? That's the harder part. But at least you can always say, yes, I owned it, or yes, this is authentic. Here's like the original, like I am the creator. So I think from that perspective, it could be useful.
I think it's interesting. I mean, it's definitely an interesting thing when you think of legacy, like, things that you want to give to your children, or, collect anything that you want to I don't know. I want to, I want to think about this a little bit more, and I'll
Yeah.
ask him.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
So
it
there
could,
are certain use cases, I think. And I think we're kind of moving towards that. But I think too, it's just like whole like identities, and how people are going into Noster, like what is yours. And do I have to show everything, like something like zero knowledge proofs, right? Where I just prove that I'm of age, not that necessarily you have to see every single thing about me, like my address, because it's kind of creepy. Like you're showing everybody just all these documents, and then
yeah,
the governments every now and then are getting hacked and not encrypting data. So I think there are better ways of handling things like our own identities, like ownership. I
yeah.
just don't want to spam the blockchain with too many things. Like,
Yeah, and that's some of the questions that I wanna pose to him, because that's one of my concerns too, is like, are we gonna get is it gonna get bloated over time if we start
yeah,
putting these use cases here, or is there a better place for this that we don't need it to be on, on
yeah,
Bitcoin? Um, but I do like thinking in terms of, how are we coming out of this old system into a new system so we can protect our generational wealth, and I think that's in different formats, right? And so I think that's cool. Well, dude, thanks for spending all this time with us, and everybody who's listening. I hope you guys got to learn a little bit about how to recycle tire waste into Bitcoin. My mind is going crazy thinking about this too, because I'm like, well, what else can we do? And I love just how can we keep vacuuming up all the toxic stuff that's out there that's hurting the earth and convert it into something
yeah.
useful. Then obviously one of the most useful things is sound money and hugs, but
Well, and you think about like self-sovereignty, right? So now we
yeah,
have like this self-sovereign money, but if you're looking at, not every country is blessed with natural resources, but
right.
they all have waste, right?
That's
So in a
right.
way, you have like your own energy supply that you haven't tapped yet, right? Like those tires, those plastics are an untapped fuel reserve. So we can help monetize, right? So,
Totally. I love it. It's so cool. I know I'm My friend who lives down the street's got a regenerative farm, and we're starting to try to think about, all of her compost that she has for CSA boxes, and she's a freaking genius. But just how to get them on Bitcoin and circular economy, and it's like,
Yeah.
how do we keep everything in the stream continuing to get used and used and used for productivity and for food or
Yes.
for whatever it is that we're
Yeah.
doing? So I love this mindset, and we have so much to learn from each other. We have so much to learn from these, different sectors of life. And I'm hoping to continue, like you said, telling stories, that are meaningful, that can build bridges, that can build the solutions together so that we're not just like, oh, you think climate change, who cares?
Yeah.
It's like, let's get rid of the methane. It's
Yeah.
not a good thing to have methane. Don't worry about all the other narratives that you want to go be polarized about. Let's just clean up the things that are
Exactly.
dirty. Yeah, I think it's great. Well, thank you so much, and I love you, and I can't wait to hug you.
Aw.
God willing, maybe I'll get to go to Poland. That would be amazing. Um, I know. I love those guys at Bitcoin Film Festival. They did a whole wonderful event at Madeira. It was fantastic
Oh,
to get to
nice.
see everybody's, the clips and the trailers that they were doing. I got to do a panel with Knut and John Vallis and Brad Mills, and we were talking about strategizing Bitcoin culture, and just, it was just great to get to talk with those guys. And I feel so honored to get to be on the journey with all of you. So, yeah, it's really, really awesome. So, Mags, thanks for being with me. And everybody who's tuning in, thanks for tuning into Bitcoin for Peace. I'm your host, DJ Valerie B. Love. And thanks, Mags, for showing up and sharing all of your magic. So, until next time, everyone, peace, love, and warm aloha. Yay.